decision-making bodies, and number two, trying to sustain a discussion and debate that international human rights law, in particular, Article 8 of the CEDAW Convention, ensures the right of women to be represented in those international bodies. So I wanted just to show you a little bit of the data that we collect, and you can have all this information in the webpage of GQUAL, but I can tell you that as August 2023, 44% of the 591 positions in 101 international judicial and monitoring bodies monitored by GQUAL are occupied by women. This percentage falls to 42% when excluding bodies with mandates tied to women issues, and it goes even down lower if you look into what we call international tribunals, where only 33% of the members are women. That figure shows that this imbalance has affected the international organizations since its creation. If you think about the famous international tribunals, such as the International Court of Justice, has had only 5 female judges in its entire history, or the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea has had only 6 women since its creation. So you see how much work we still need to do. I also wanted to say that the work that we have done show that even if there has been some progress, the program doesn't follow a linear and sustainable improvement, and that regressions tend to occur. So it is unlikely that this imbalance will be correcting over time, which means that aspiration alone is not going to make it. Because of that, we have also been involved in advocating for the need to establish legal parameters and legal obligations for states to change procedures in the nomination and selection of candidates for international courts and tribunals. The GQUAL campaign has been advocating for the use of Article 8 of the CEDAW Convention as the provision for claiming that states have such an obligation. It's interesting because Article 8 is quite, in the framework of the CEDAW Convention, is a provision that has not been extensively discussed or is not that well known. Even in the drafting history of the treaty, it shows that Article 8 was not expected to be, that the international representation of women was supposed to be covered by another provision, which is Article 7, which promotes and protects the right of women to be equally represented in public and policy life. However, the article is there, and the GQUAL campaign has been very much involved in trying to make this article being implemented. For those of you who don't know what this article says, I wanted to mention that it provides that state parties shall take all appropriate measures to ensure to women on equal terms with men and without any discrimination the opportunity to represent their governments at the international level and to participate in the work of international organizations. So 2 important things is that it requires states to ensure access on equal terms with men and without discrimination, that these obligations reflect the 2 levels of obligations on formal equality and substantive equality, that traditionally when we speak about formal equality, we argue that it requires states to ensure that women are not adversely or unduly affected by existing laws and practices. But from the GQUAL campaign, we have also made the argument that not only an existing law, but a lack of a law, meaning if there is an omission in regulation, access for women, equal access to women to representation, then that would also be a violation of this requirement of formal equality. For that reason, we have a claim that states have an obligation to set up specific processes at the domestic level to appoint candidates who will represent the state in international organizations. I also wanted to say that you hear that I say that Article 8 speaks about opportunities, but from GQUAL we have claimed that indeed Article 8 as part of the framework and the obligations of the CEDAW Convention, ensure a right. And there is a right to be equally represented, a right for women to be equally represented in the work of the governments at the international level and also in international organizations. Another important thing that I want to mention, and very much in line with what Nicole was saying, Article 8 also speaks about the right to be represented on equal terms. And for the GQUAL campaign, equal term means gender parity, and which indeed has to be translated according to the practice of the UN and resolutions that have been adopted as follow-up to the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action as a 50-50 target. We hope that, and we are convinced actually, after the day of conversations and consultations that we had today, that in the general recommendation 40, the committee will take up this issue and will clarify that equal terms mean gender parity. I also wanted to say that we believe that, as I said, nomination at the domestic level is important, but also selection at the international level is essential. And we believe that Article 8 provides for an obligation to states to exert their influence to regulate selection procedures that conform to gender balance requirements according to Article 8. There have some treaties that recently have been more recently adopted that include some gender balance requirements, and this has proved essential to ensure gender parity in the composition of these tribunals, such as the case of the International Criminal Court. But of course, more needs to be done, and that means that in addition to having these requirements in the treaties, we need to address the obligation for states to vote in parity whenever they are selecting new members to international decision-making bodies. Finally, Article 8 speaks of state duties to adopt appropriate measures to ensure equal representation, and appropriate measures has been understood in the practice of the CEDAW committee as special measures under Article 4 of the CEDAW committee. We believe that these special measures, despite of the possibility of designing many measures, have to be translated specifically into quotas. So from the GQUAL campaign, we have been very convinced that if we want to change the picture, we need to have quotas. Aspirational provisions have not changed much so far, and if we don't address this specific requirement, we are now going to break the glass ceiling. Finally, we are also very encouraged by the work and the drafting process that the CEDAW committee is advancing regarding the interpretations of Article 7, 8, and this notion of equal and inclusive representation in decision-making bodies, because this will mean that in this general recommendation, the committee will set up a specific interpretations that will allow the committee to carry out a more closely monitoring of the obligations arising out of the convention, which means that once we have the general recommendation adopted, hopefully in October of 2024, we will all have to get out and use the recommendation to make sure that we change practices and change the picture at the international tribunals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And I think it's already like a number of very important issues that will the opportunity of drafting this general recommendation will create to really like define the scope of the right, what parity means, how to achieve it, how to measure it, and how it impacts international justice. But of course, that's not the only area of decision making where women need to be equally represented. And so to continue building on that conversation, I will give the floor to Priya Pillai, who's an international lawyer and is also the head of the Asia Justice Coalition, and an organization is doing amazing work both on international justice, but also on issues of peace and security, which is also a key agenda where women need to be represented equally.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And I want to thank Claudia, GQUAL, the entire team, and the Washington College of Law for inviting me, for having me here to be part of this, I think very, very important expert workshop. And it's been a wonderful day today, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. But, I'm also very pleased to be at this panel and to discuss some of these issues. So I think just to start with, and I want to say it's also wonderful to be back in a law school, which is not my natural environment, but just seeing you all here is also a reminder of why we're talking about this and why this is so important. I can see a lot of young women in the room, and I think this is something that we've all worked on through our careers, and it's really, really important that we have this conversation now and that we change the picture and that we move forward in this process on the recommendation, but also on the larger picture of participation and equality. So I think just to start with, why is this important? Why are we talking about this? I think when you think about as law students, one of the basic reasons you all are here is participation in the justice system. Access to justice is a core tenet of what you're going to be doing through these next few years, as well as when y'all are, in the legal field, whether y'all are researchers, practitioners, whatever form that legal environment sort of creates for you, you're going to be part of this entire ecosystem. And I think it's critical that we ensure that, students and all of us who are here realize that we all have a huge contribution to make, and that we all need to be heard equally, and that we all need to be able to make an effective, impact in whatever area that we are in the legal sphere as well. So I think really the fact that we have, if you look at law schools around the world today, the intake of women in law schools is nearly 50-50 in many cases, in some cases perhaps even more. I think my intake, it was probably 45-35. It was a fairly large number of women that enter into law school. And then you look at the trajectory, you look at the numbers of women who are in sort of associate level positions, and I use that broadly, law firms, NGOs, research academic institutions. You look at the numbers of women also in the judiciary. And I think the American Bar Association has done a report in 2018 or 2019, which looked at some of the judiciaries across the world. And I would say average, it's about 30% of women, and it's lower, so 30% is sort of on the higher side of many national jurisdictions. And so it's not a pretty picture right now. We really have a trajectory where women are decreasing in their participation, their effective participation in the workforce, in the legal environment. And I think that's something that we really need to sort of put a halt, and we need to reverse, we need to change that picture. Let me just at this point step back a little bit, tell you a little bit about what we are doing in the context of the environment that we're in. So the Asia Justice Coalition was started in about 2019. So we're quite young still, focused really on the issues of international accountability and justice. So we've started looking at the situation in Myanmar, also known as Burma, at what has happened with a lot of minorities there, but really the legal interventions. So what is happening at the International Court of Justice? As you know, the Gambia has taken Myanmar to court, to the ICJ, to advocate for the Rohingya. We're looking at the International Criminal Court. We're looking at the mechanism similar to the Syria mechanism. There's a Myanmar mechanism as well. And through this work, we've also realized that there need, and from the Asian context, there need to be more women that are heard more effectively in these spaces. And we realized that that's really appallingly sort of absent. And so we've embarked on a 4-year project, which is to look and sort of complementing GQUAL, but from the grassroots up. So we're rolling out programs across 3 jurisdictions in South Asia, focused on international justice and accountability. And sort of we do a few things at the same time. So I think the fundamental premise is, how do we have women in leadership positions? How do we have women rising through the ranks and being effective and participating effectively? One of the ways to do that, and this is the one area we're tackling, is to say it's expertise. I think Claudia has mentioned this before, that at the level of the international decision-making, you might have questions or concerns saying, well, we actually can't find the women. We don't have women experts in this. Well, what we're saying is we're going to make sure that that expertise is there so that down the line, you can never say, where are the women? You know, we will have a huge cohort of women who have been trained, who have the expertise and who can also step up. It's one of the solutions of many solutions that we can look at, but that's something that we're really committed to and we're focusing on for the next few years. So I think that's sort of just to give you a sense of what it is that we're doing. We're going to map out a systems mapping exercise where we're taking on information from young lawyers, also in terms of what they would like to see and what they would like to be trained on as legal interventions on justice and accountability, which will also develop their expertise. So that's just to give you a little bit about what the Asia Justice Coalition is doing about this problem. I'll make one or two more points, I think. One is just on sort of how we look at decision-making systems and how we look at representation. And I think I really want to emphasize that, you know, it should not just be symbolic. We're really talking about engagement and access to power as well, and the ability to exercise power within a particular ecosystem. I think perhaps we need to change the ecosystem as well, but within the context of the constraints that we're in, we want to make sure that, you know, women practitioners are empowered to engage effectively. And I think the other point that I would like to make is, you know, that we are not restricting ourselves by self-selection as well to just what are women's issues. So, you know, sexual and gender-based violence, which automatically sort of fits within the realm of what is seen as a women's issue, very important in itself. But what I would like to emphasize and what we've done today also is that we're looking at trade, we're looking at environment, we're looking at climate justice, we're looking at all issues being women's issues, not just particular issues. And I think that's important to emphasize. The last 2 points I'll make, one is on the pipeline issue, which is really, you know, the fact that once you get through law school, you are in the workplace, you are in the environment, and then there is sort of a gap. And I think we unfortunately see this also at the international level, as you know, as has been mentioned, in terms of nominations and how states nominate. As an example, you know, the statutes of most of the international tribunals talk about the criteria for judges basically are that you have to be capable of being appointed to the highest court of your country. And in many cases, if you're looking at a judicial list, if you have women who are missing from the judiciary and you're missing from that list, automatically states then will have an excuse to say, well, we don't have enough people to nominate. And therefore it's a domino effect. So we need to break that chain as well. And I think so it's really important to address the issue of nominations by states. And I think the last point I'll make is just in terms of, and I know the concept note for the general recommendation has actually talked about this as well, to say we want to look at the environment within organizations as well. You know, what do organizations do to make it conducive for women to stay, to rise, to ensure that they flourish in their careers as well. And so that's something that we need to look at seriously internally, I think across the board in different institutions as well. And I'll just, you know, as an example of that, the International Criminal Court has just had a recent report, you know, a discussion around numbers. And if you look at the personnel of the ICC, you have women in all the sort of lower positions. And as you go up the pyramid, the percentage really flips, it really reverses, and you actually have very, very few women sort of higher up. And I think this is one of those, you know, institutional issues that needs to change as well across the board, across various institutions. So I think I'll stop with that. There's just a few thoughts that I've put out, but I'd love to sort of discuss this more and have a more detailed discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya, for that presentation. I think it will relate very well with the next one, which will be Ursula Inacochea, who's a program director of the Due Process of Law Foundation. who will be presenting also on some of the key areas at the national level where key decisions are adopted and where this GR, this new general recommendation, will also have several inputs to make that will hopefully help promote women's equal right to representation and participation.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, GQUAL and the Academy, for inviting me. Well, I want to start this presentation by commenting on our experience to let you know where, from what point of view we are seeing this issue. As it was mentioned, I work in a human rights organization that is dedicated to, among other things, to promote independent judiciaries in Latin America. And from that point, we have been for the last 20 years monitoring the selection processes of high-level authorities at the national levels in, I wouldn't say all the Latin American countries, but almost all at certain point. And we have been identifying experiences and lessons learned from that work that can be useful for the process of drafting the general recommendation number 40 by the committee. And why do we think this experience is valuable? Well, I identified three reasons. First, because justice in general is an important area of decision making, including not only judiciaries, prosecutor's office, but also international tribunals. Second, we have identified, at least considering the experience from the Inter-American human rights system, that a lot of women appointed commissioners of Inter-American judges come from domestic justice systems. So in this, I want to specify in this idea that doesn't occur necessarily with men. Some of them come from academia or from our private practitioners, but in the case of women, in the domestic courts and in the international courts, they usually come from another domestic court or the judicial career. And for us, that was information that was curious, because it's kind of that women need to be certified twice for their merits in order to access these international decision-making positions. And third, like it happens at the domestic level, the appointments of members of decision-making bodies have a key political component. The state have to decide, the state have to nominate, and they interchange votes and well, all the stuff that you know. So what we decided to do with this? From the Due Process of Law Foundation, we promoted a group of women experts on judicial independence in several countries in Latin America that we are dedicated to monitor these election processes, and decided to conduct research about the participation of women in justice system, but not from the point of view of the numbers, because we know that a lot of indexes of numbers and we can measure progress 30%, and then we have setbacks. We wanted to hear the experiences and the voices of the women judges and the women prosecutors, former prosecutors, practitioners, and experts that have dedicated to this issue, to study this issue. So we promoted this investigation in 10 countries in Latin America, and then we are now in the phase 2 of that investigation with 5 more. And well, and we found some interesting things. And well, I don't want to say me, but all my colleagues from Women for Justice. First, that well, feminization of judiciaries and prosecutor services is a fact, and also the feminization of the legal profession, and but there are few women in top level positions. That's something that we all know. That in numbers we have achieved progress, but there are setbacks, so we cannot say exactly that we are going straight to our goal, right? And we thought that we needed to measure this progress in a different way. We thought, well, maybe it's not a matter of numbers only. It's maybe a matter of how the institutional context interact with gender issues, with gender structures, because we need in other indicators on the qualities of the institution of the justice systems to be adequate environments for the women, and to be more inclusive, and not only for women, but other diversities. So we conducted the research, and we talked with more than 100 women judges and prosecutors, and we found that for them, the main problem is not only the access, not really the access. It's difficult to access, but the main challenge is to remain there, because they don't feel that they can stay and they can develop a career over there, that they cannot, they can stay more than 5-6 years, because those institutional environments are in a way hostile to them in a very subtle way. Also, they thought that the problem is not about individuals that are in decision-making position, that the discrimination is institutional, and it's embodied and subtle in the judicial career systems, or in the lack of policies against violence, and not only sexual violence, also political violence within the institution. And then we thought that advocating, and we discovered that advocating for equal representation of women before the international bodies or before the national bodies in charge of this appointment cannot be a separated agenda from advocating for transparent and merit-based and public selection processes, because this frame in which the debate of electing women or appointing women and pursuing the merit is not, it's a frame that is in a way false, because when you have transparent and merit-based selection processes, women trust in the process, and they don't self-exclude from them. They propose their candidacies, and the merits of, there are women that are qualified at the end are identified and appointed. So this idea of, well, you have to decide, or women or merits, it's false. So the idea of equal representation is an agenda that can and should be pursued by international human rights bodies that are in charge of in strengthening judiciaries and promote judicial independence too. And finally, a final remark about the quotas. We found that quotas are necessary but not sufficient, because the institutional barriers and obstacles have to be addressed in order to ensure that the outcomes are sustainable on time. We have cases, for example, Guatemala. Guatemala have a female prosecutor general, president of the Constitutional Court, president of the Supreme Court, and it's a country in Latin America that has like a lot of women in decision-making positions, but those women have achieved that position by joining corruption networks, for example. We're not talking about here about if having women would lead to a more protection of access of women for justice. No, we're talking here about the manipulation of the gender agenda to place individuals that are functional to illegal networks, illicit networks. So to address that problem, we need to have a different approach that is more institutional, that is long-term, and that strengthen the institutions. So in a way that we are not, it doesn't depend on an individual, on a leader, on a female president of the court that propose a public policy while she's in power. This needs mid or long-term policies that change the institutions from within and in a more stable way. So, well, I will leave it there, and we can talk more about what other findings that we have in this study. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. So that concludes our panel presentation, but I think we heard a lot about how relevant the general recommendation is for different areas where women need to be equally represented and participate and be able to contribute, and some of the obstacles that are actually present across them because they are shared. And I will stop with my concluding remarks because we have a perfect speaker to conclude the event today, and then open it up for some questions and discussions, perhaps highlighting, Laurence, some of the key issues that could guide us to that. So I'll introduce Laurence Burgos Larsen. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, who's a professor in law at the Sorbonne Law School.
Thank you so much, Maria. Dear friends, dear colleagues, dear students, allow me to begin with a powerful quote. Men, are you capable of being fair? It's a woman who asks you the question. You won't take the right away from me, will you? Who gave you the sovereign empire to oppress my sex? Your strengths? Your talents? Women, wake up. The Tuscan of reason is heard throughout the universe. Recognize your rights. These few words are from a French woman who has been invisible to historians of the French Revolution for many years. Her name was Olympe de Gouges. She drafted an alternative declaration of the rights of women and the female citizen in order to remind to the men who draft the Declaration of the Rights of Men and of the Citizens that women have been forgotten during the drafting process. I need to say at this stage, she was beheaded because she was considered far too radical. This impressive woman was asking at the 18th century for action. And I'm sure that history has invisibilized other women from other cultures, from Africa, from Asia, from the Americas, who also wanted profound changes. This call for action was actually at the heart of the impressive working day under the banner of the GQUAL campaign. We all know that without activism, without advocacy, without involvement of different kinds of stakeholders representing civil society, academia, practitioners, politicians, even victims, in a nutshell, without the fight for more inclusivity, statu quo prevails. And in our current societies, statu quo is most of the time discriminatory and still profoundly unfair. Such state of affairs, as such, is no more acceptable. Today, we have all been united under the GQUAL campaign, an amazing and impressive structure created by women, for women, but always welcoming men. It is important to tell it, and Claudia reminded us this today, in order to support an important political step at the United Nations level, taking into account the drafting process of the GR40 that Nicole Ameline reminded us. In other words, we are doing our best in order to see our rights recognized at the most important level. And in a nutshell, we are doing what Olympe de Gouges at the 18th century was asking for. Why such a campaign? Because the state of affairs, for sure, is satisfactory, and how to erase the structural unfair and discriminatory pattern against women through activism, through advocacy at the level of the elaboration of international standards. These two very simple questions have been at the core of our discussion today. Because as we highlighted all today, it is the momentum. It is a time to do it. Let me begin very quickly by reminding you the unbearable negative state of affairs towards women representation. More than 40 years since the adoption of the CEDAW Convention, women continue to be underrepresented in decision-making system at all levels that we remind since a few minutes. At domestic level, as well as at the international level. In other words, the current systems are still patriarchal, as Nicole said us this morning, and unfair. As for the national level, no matter what the state involved, and I insist here, no matter what the state involved, undemocratic or democratic, no matter what the political, economical, and social background of national societies, injustice is still at stake when considering the women representation in different kinds of institutions. Indeed, equal representation remains very elusive. Persistent structural and institutional barriers continues to impede strong improvement, as our discussion have highlighted. Harassment, bias, restrictive gender norms can significantly impact women's ability to become leaders. It's not easy to be a leader. Impede women to speak freely, uphold their mandates, and remain in their position, as you say. It is, in a nutshell, the state of affairs at the domestic level. As for the international level, the current state of affairs is logically the same. The international level space where women continue to be significantly unrepresented include diplomatic posts, multilateral decision-making system, decision-making bodies, including tribunal and other bodies and mechanisms in charge of developing international law and human rights standards. When international law and international human rights law is created essentially by men, we cannot fundamentally wait any critical change. Let me use at this stage a kind of little motto. Tell me who is elaborating treaties and recommendations. Tell me who is delivering international justice, and I will tell you the content of international norms and judicial decisions. The single example of the impressive lack of women in the international judiciary is the proof that a lot of work is still to achieve. And here it is key to read, and I speak to the students, it is key to read and disseminate the extensive data collected by GQUAL, which shows quite strongly that the underrepresentation of women continues to exist across almost all bodies in charge of imparting international and human rights justice. And today is no more acceptable that women in all their diversity, and here also I insist, women for the Global South, women of color, women of indigenous women, LGBTEQ plus women, and those from impoverished groups face even more structural systemic challenges in order to be part from decision spaces and international justice. Dear audience, you can understand that the state of affairs we have highlighted today during all the day shows a lot of unsatisfactory patterns. How then to change this? How to foster new strategies? It is the second key question to tackle the topic, the how questions. It's not easy, not easy. Our discussion, based on the work of a large range of experts, shows that there are very specific tools which can permit yet a lot of improvement. It is the importance of acting at the early stage of the elaboration of international standards, which permit to tackle challenges. It is absolutely strategic to organize a very important action at the very beginning of the elaboration of an international standard. And the GQUAL working groups have pointed out the imperative necessity to take into account different fields of action at the domestic as well as at the international level in order to reach the ideal goal of complete equal representation. In order to take into account, and I quote some participants, and the legitimacy, efficiency, and accountability principles. But in order to take seriously these principles, everybody agrees on the importance of political will. Okay. But what about the current geopolitical, very regressive context? What about the instrumentalization by authoritarian states of the inclusivity agenda, the gender parity agenda? What about the gender backlash, which is growing and growing? Well, in this context, I can tell you, I can tell to the audience that GQUAL work is very complex, very difficult, but absolutely necessary. It is not easy to propose some new and innovative approach, but the collective brainstorming with a great level of expertise today and tomorrow is key. A lot of new questions have been raised and will be at the heart of our ongoing discussion tomorrow. For instance, what we mean by women leadership? What about intersectionality? What about the necessity to go beyond the gender parity narrative in order to take into account all the sexual diversity of the current youth? How to do it? How to change profoundly domestic legal culture when this domestic legal culture is profoundly discriminatory in a systemic way, even though in democratic states. How to create a culture of activism in societies not accustomed to have it. How to be more concrete in participating of the elaboration of international law, being successful to propose very precise guidelines for the work of the CEDAW committee. Dear colleague, friends, students, dear men, women, I hope this public event of the work made by GQUAL will give you some awareness of the key challenges we are all facing, and above all, will give you some strengths for advocacy and activism for a more inclusive society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurence, for those wonderful words to conclude the conversation. I think we have around 7 minutes or so for questions, interventions, comments from anyone here in the room. Oh, we have a couple. That's good. Okay, so we'll start with over there.
Or I can speak like that. I think. No, microphone. Oh, those work. Those works. Hello. Oh yes. Okay. A little bit uncomfortable to do this, but okay, I'm going to do it. Right? Okay. Yes. 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 Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you all. I know that you are tired because it has been a really long day. I really appreciate and really admire you, all of you, because I am a woman too. I was born woman, raised by a woman too. And my gosh, vraiment, j'ai vu ça. Alors, Professeur Laurence, merci, merci. Bon, I mean, yes, my question is, in this world created by men, ruled by men, and everything by men, how do you, as a woman in law, create your self-confidence? And I'm questioning this because now that I'm an adult, I wonder myself, okay, yes, I'm intelligent. Yes, I'm capable to do things. Yes. But sometimes I think that me as a woman has to do twice. Like I have to work twice. I have to make an extra effort to give my presentation, to be credible. So right now, in this moment in my life, I'm questioning myself how to maintain my self-confidence in this world by men, and also surrounded by women who has a space, yes, but a little of space. We are competing each other, and competition is normal, I think, for the human being. But we as a women in small spaces is really, really, really rude. So how you, as a woman and very talented women, how do you build your self-confidence daily? I would like to know that, because sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and I do not know how to talk to myself. I mean, okay, I have everything. Do I? I don't know. I mean, am I really capable to do this thing? I don't know. I'm like doubting and doubting and doubting. And I think that many women out there have that. It calls imposter syndrome. Yeah. Sometimes. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's a very tough question for the audience. Thanks, God, I'm the moderator, so I'll
Yes,
just
I know,
derive
I
it
know,
through
I
the
know.
panel.
It's kind of
But
existential.
but I'll take two more and then we can. So yes, first over there.
First, on that last question, I really recommend the autobiography of the first Chief Justice of the United Kingdom, Brenda Hale. It's called Spider Woman, and she starts with a discussion of imposter syndrome in her life at every juncture, right up until the day she's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And
Yeah.
she has a lot of interesting insights. My question is this. This is something I am struggling with and have been struggling with for a very long time. As we all know, power does not cede without a fight. And the penultimate speaker, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, touched on this. If I am the patriarchal decision maker who makes the selection process, don't quotas increase the chances that the women ultimately selected will themselves be part of corruption networks? And isn't that a problem for us?
Thank you for that question. I think there was one more over here. Yes. No? Yeah.
Me?
Yep.
Okay then. And it's because I cannot see if there's
Okay.
more
No,
people behind
Yes,
me.
You on the front.
Well, first of all, thank you for this amazing panel. Well, my question, I already discussed about this with Professor Claudia Martin, but what as a woman, when we are discussing with other women, and what to do when you have reached gender parity, but then the other women is saying that men are gonna feel unrepresented. So when this happened to me, and I was really frustrated because as a woman, I was explaining to other women that that's only that's the goal, but that's not the final goal, right? We need to go further. So I tried to get my best arguments as I could, but I want to hear, like, based on your expertise, what we like women, how do we explain other women what this fight is about? Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you for that. I don't know if you, yep. we can go in the order which is.
I appreciate a lot your questions, because you know, asking what is leadership, it's totally normal, but I can ensure you that you are really leaders and young leaders. But the question is not a question about women's leadership, but about the system. And today it's true that the system is really still patriarchal. So it's very difficult, I understand that, to have a clear ambition. But the GR has the principal goal to push the states to change the system. And for instance, in France, we have very early create a parity system about 20 years ago. And now it's very difficult for any bodies to create an unbalanced system about nomination or elections. So I do think that we need really to create a new ecosystem, a new narrative, a new parity mindset. And it is the goal of the CEDAW committee today. It's not only to improve the women's leadership, you have it. It's just to allow you to have access to the system. And I recognize that today it's very difficult, because you have to do, as you said it very clearly, you have to do more, you have to work night and day, you have to perform much more than a man. And but it's not your responsibility, it's the responsibility of the system. You have to integrate that.
Well, I was thinking that it took me a long time. I mean, your question is very important. I think that all the women here who have been involved in the profession long enough know that this is something that it takes a long time to overcome. And I wanted to only tell you that when we started the GQUAL campaign, a lot of people, were asking, oh, I know what you are doing, why you are doing this. You have self-interest, you want to be appointed yourself. And I remember our discussions for many years trying to justify that that it was not self-interest, that it was indeed something that we wanted for women, until we all decided to say, yes, why not? I do have a self-interest. I'm a very competent woman. I want to be appointed sometime, somewhere where I care. And after we realized that, I think that we have felt much better about our advocacy, and we have been more successful. So if I can give you a small piece of advice is, believe in yourself, acknowledge that it's very important to have aspirations. And it doesn't matter what everybody tells you, it's not a bad thing to have, after all the work that you have done, to believe that you can achieve, whatever objective you have. And you're a very smart student because you were my student. So I know that you can do it. And I know, Veri, that, this is a term, when we particularly, I think it's pretty much everywhere, but you are from Mexico, I'm from Argentina. And we do know that the patriarchal system is not only promoted by males, and that unfortunately we still have a lot of work to do with women as well. And that sometimes, the reproduction of these stereotypes and these, perceptions that, women should not be claiming the place that they should have, comes from colleagues and also, from people who are, as some of us, I think it was Ursula who was saying, the discussion between merit and representation. And we hear a lot people saying, well, but we need qualified candidates. And so that's one thing that we have learned as well throughout the years of the campaign, that indeed, there are a lot of males who are unqualified. So, what damage might we create if we have one unqualified woman? Why do we need to meet always, a higher standard than men? And so I think that the response to your question is, use what you have learned in these years and try to address these perceptions that we have, that you are surrounded. I think that we are going to improve the representation of women when we, as Laurence was saying, we continue to advocate and change minds. But, there's a lot of work to do. What can I tell you?
Okay, I'm going to quickly answer the question about the corruption networks. Yes, women that are in decision-making positions within the judiciary system are in several countries, I would say, allies of corrupt networks. And precisely to address that is why we advocate for fair procedures, mainly more than fair outcomes. Because when you focus on the procedure, you can at least expose the problem. So yes, and fair procedure means transparent, merit-based, and also, and very important, a procedure that has spaces, institutionalized spaces for participation of civil society. So, because civil society can raise awareness, can highlight the backgrounds of candidates like those. For your question, I cannot avoid answering that, but I will answer it with an example, with an experience that was for me revealing. As I said, I'm dedicated to monitor selection processes, and in that work I monitor the rules, the exams, but I started to monitor the interviews, and I started by analyzing the answers of the candidates. And then I realized that more than the answers, what was important was the questions that were being made, because the question reveal what type of person or what individual they are seeking. So your question reminded me of qualified women that present themselves, their candidacies, submit their candidacies to this position, and are questioned in a different way about their merits. In a sense, I would put an example. Why did you choose that university to study your master instead of why did you choose the French academy instead of the German one? That kind of questions are only made to women. Men basically are given the floor to expose their merits. Women are questioned about their decisions in their professional careers. So when you ask about how do I know? Well, you have to persist. You have to keep trust yourself. And as those candidates, they were eliminated, but I am sure that in the future, if they persist and they submit their candidacies again, they will at one point be appointed. So you have to persist.
Wow. A lot of very tough questions. Yes. I discovered that I was a woman when I was 46, when I have been appointed by pure hazard at a constitutional court, because I discovered sexism, but a huge amount of sexism. And in order to be able to integrate and to fight against this huge sexism, I need to confess that my son, a man, that my husband, a man, my father, a man, were necessary in order to remind me, you're worth it. You are here because you are competent. You're great. You're great. But I need to say that it was very hard to discover at 46 that only because I was a woman younger than my colleague, I was not legitimate. And I have worked all my life in order to say, hey, you know what? Look at my CV, I'm legitimate. So before this very big event, I was comfortable in my shoes. But since I fight, since this event, I fight. I fight no more than a human being. I'm fighting as a woman because I consider it was so unfair. So in order to answer your question, I need to highlight also the very important support of our relatives and our male relatives, our male friends. We need them. We need them not to be completely alone. For the corruption, ooh, yes, it's a tough question. It is true. It is completely true. And it depends on each individuality, and it depends on the individual mindset of each individual. There are great individuals, very fair as men and women, but men and women can be also the worst. So in this context, women can be also very bad person, of course. So it will be never possible to avoid that. It is side effects. It is side effects. It will be always there, but we need to continue. Even though the side effect of corrupt women or complicit women to the very male-centered system will continue to exist. And I have completely forgotten your intervention because I'm very tired. I'm so sorry.
I think I'll just speak to 2 points. One is, when we talk about quotas and we talk about women in some of these professional situations, I think it's also really unfair that we expect perfection all the time, that we expect that the 50% or 40% or 30% of women who are in those positions are going to be fantastic, incredible, and beyond any reproach. That's not possible statistically, I think. But also, I mean, it does seem to strike me as that is the expectation of women. But if they're men, yes, you'll have some who are good, some who are not so good, some who are great. And that's okay, that's normal. But with women, that's not normal. And I really find that really problematic. I think from my own experience, I worked at one of the international courts as well. And again, I'm very careful about how I say this, but there were, women who were in higher positions in judiciary as well, some of whom were fantastic, some of whom were not that fantastic. But that was sort of I think a little bit of a dirty secret where nobody could really speak about it because they were held up as the few sole examples that were in the room, that were present at the table, and there was just such few of them. So I think, that culture also becomes very problematic, and we do need to talk about it and normalize it a little bit, that yes, we will have a spectrum of candidates, some will be amazing, some who will not, and it's an equal competitive process as long as you've got to that point where it is equal and it is competitive, you will have, bumps in the road. So I think that's something that we need to realize as well, and not expect perfection and, have this one woman who is going to be 1000% perfect and in every way. So I think that's, I think it's good to just sort of flag that. I think on imposter syndrome, of course, I can't resist either. I think given all of our experiences over, the 20+ years, I'll just say, the one thing that I will say is imposter syndrome will strike you at multiple points across your career, whether you're a 25-year-old lawyer, whether you're 35, whether you're 45 like me, it will strike you at various points in your career. And I think you just have to quash it, and you just have to say, I am good enough. I've got the right stuff. I'm working hard. and I'm going to do fine. And I think, I mean, it becomes problematic sometimes when I think, you know, and I went for another expert meeting, and I will not mention which one this was, but it's not this one, it's not this one, where I realized, and it became very clear, that the women in the room were 1,000% prepared, and some of the men in the room were not. And they could get away with it, you know, and we couldn't. I mean, there was no way that I would walk into that expert meeting not 1,000% prepared. And I think that's the toll, that's sort of the tax that we pay. But, you know, it's the tax that we pay for now, and we've got to do it, and we do it. But, you know, I do hope that things change. And perhaps this is the start of that change happening, where the pressure is a little less on you. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. But you know, it's not an insurmountable set of obstacles. So yeah.
Thank you to everyone, to all the speakers, and also to the wonderful questions. I think it's wonderful, and at the same time very telling that we started talking about the scope of human rights and the general recommendation and some of the challenges that we need as lawyers to develop the state's obligation, and then we ended up discussing really some of what this is really about, right? And what these unreal expectations that society places on ourselves and that we place on ourselves, and the obstacle that we have to go through, and sexism and all these kind of things. And I think that's really what this discussion is about. And I think we know a little bit as lawyers that we need tools. We need to come together, and we need tools to continue fighting the fight. And I think that's what the general recommendation is actually. It's a very, very powerful tool. And that's why this is an important opportunity to think about these things and how these things translate into the human rights framework that we use in our everyday work and in our networks. And so with that, we will continue having the expert consultation tomorrow, but the process of drafting this wonderful general recommendation will continue until next year. And we'll be looking forward also to knowing more about the drafting process, and hopefully opportunities in which everyone can participate and contribute, and then actually use these general recommendations to continue this fight. So thank you so much. And have a good evening, and everyone a good rest too.